The Pickwick Papers, Chapter 43. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Brad Philippone. The Pickwick Papers, by Charles Dickens, Chapter 43, showing how Mr. Samuel Weller got into difficulties. In a lofty room, ill lighted and worse ventilated, situated in Portugal Street, Lincoln's Inn Fields, there sit, nearly the whole year round, one, two, three, or four gentlemen in wigs, as the case may be, with little writing desks before them, constructed after the fashion of those used by the judges of the land, barring the French polish. There is a box of barristers on their right hand, there is an enclosure of insolvent debtors on their left, and there is an inclined plane of most especially dirty faces in their front. These gentlemen are the commissioners of the Insolvent Court, and the place in which they sit is the Insolvent Court itself. It is, and has been time out of mind, the remarkable fate of this court to be, somehow or other, held and understood, by the general consent of all the destitute shabby genteel people in London, as their common resort, and place of daily refuge. It is always full. The steams of beer and spirits perpetually ascend to the ceiling, and being condensed by the heat, roll down the walls like rain. There are more old suits of clothes in it at one time, than will be offered for sale in all Houndsditch in a twelvemonth; more unwashed skins and grizzly beards than all the pumps and shaving shops between Tyburn and Whitechapel could render decent between sunrise and sunset. It must not be supposed that any of these people have the least shadow of business in, or the remotest connection with, the place they so indefatigably attend. If they had, it would be no matter of surprise, and the singularity of the thing would cease. Some of them sleep during the greater part of the sitting; others carry small portable dinners wrapped in pocket handkerchiefs or sticking out of their worn out pockets, and munch and listen with equal relish; but no one among them was ever known to have the slightest personal interest in any case that was ever brought forward. Whatever they do, there they sit, from the first moment to the last. When it is heavy, rainy weather, they all come in, wet through, and at such times the vapours of the court are like those of a fungus pit. A casual visitor might suppose this place to be a temple dedicated to the genius of seediness. There is not a messenger or process server attached to it, who wears a coat that was made for him; not a tolerably fresh or wholesome looking man in the whole establishment, except a little white headed, apple faced tipstaff, and even he, like an ill conditioned cherry preserved in brandy, seems to have artificially dried and withered up into a state of preservation to which he can lay no natural claim. The very barristers' wigs are ill powdered, and their curls lack crispness. But the attorneys, who sit at a large bare table below the commissioners, are, after all, the greatest curiosities. The professional establishment of the more opulent of these gentlemen consists of a blue bag and a boy, generally a youth of the Jewish persuasion. They have no fixed offices, their legal businesses being transacted in the parlours of public houses or the yards of prisons, whither they repair in crowds and canvass for customers after the manner of omnibus cads. They are of a greasy and mildewed appearance, and if they can be said to have any vices at all, perhaps drinking and cheating are the most conspicuous among them. Their residences are usually on the outskirts of the Rules, chiefly lying within a circle of 1 mile from the obelisk in St. George's Fields. Their looks are not prepossessing, and their manners are peculiar. Mr. Solomon Pell, one of this learned body, was a fat, flabby, pale man, in a surtout which looked green one minute and brown the next, with a velvet collar of the same chameleon tints. His forehead was narrow, his face wide, his head large, and his nose all on one side, as if nature, indignant with the propensities she observed in him in his birth, had given it an angry tweak which it had never recovered. Being short necked and asthmatic, however, he respired principally through this feature, so perhaps what it wanted in ornament it made up in usefulness. 'I'm sure to bring him through it,' said Mr. Pell. 'Are you though?' replied the person to whom the assurance was pledged. 'Certain, sir,' replied Pell; 'but if he'd gone to any irregular practitioner, mind you, I wouldn't have answered for the consequences.' 'Ah!' said the other, with open mouth. 'No, that I wouldn't,' said Mr. Pell, and he pursed up his lips, frowned, and shook his head mysteriously. Now, the place where this discourse occurred was the public house just opposite to the Insolvent Court, and the person with whom it was held was no other than the elder Mr. Weller, who had come there to comfort and console a friend whose petition to be discharged under the Act was to be that day heard, and whose attorney he was at that moment consulting. 'And where is George?' inquired the old gentleman. Mr. Pell jerked his head in the direction of a back parlour, whither Mr. Weller, at once repairing, was immediately greeted in the warmest and most flattering manner by some half dozen of his professional brethren, in token of their gratification at his arrival. The insolvent gentleman, who had contracted a speculative but imprudent passion for horsing long stages, which had led to his present embarrassments, looked extremely well, and was soothing the excitement of his feelings with shrimps and porter. The salutation between Mr. Weller and his friends was strictly confined to the freemasonry of the craft, consisting of a jerking round of the right wrist and a tossing of the little finger into the air at the same time. We once knew two famous coachmen (they are dead now, poor fellows), who were twins, and between whom an unaffected and devoted attachment existed. They passed each other on the Dover road every day for 24 years, never exchanging any other greeting than this; and yet when one died, the other pined away, and soon afterwards followed him. 'Vell, George,' said Mr. Weller senior, taking off his upper coat and seating himself with his accustomed gravity, 'how is it? All right behind, and full inside?' 'All right, old feller,' replied the embarrassed gentleman. 'Is the grey mare made over to anybody?' inquired Mr. Weller anxiously. George nodded in the affirmative. 'Well, that's all right,' said Mr. Weller. 'Coach taken care on also?' 'Consigned in a safe quarter,' replied George, wringing the heads off half a dozen shrimps and swallowing them without any more ado. 'Wery good, wery good,' said Mr. Weller. 'Always see to the drag when you go downhill. Is the vay bill all clear and straightfor'ard?' 'The schedule, sir,' said Pell, guessing at Mr. Weller's meaning. 'The schedule is as plain and satisfactory as pen and ink can make it.' Mr. Weller nodded in a manner which bespoke his inward approval of these arrangements, and then turning to Mr. Pell, he said, pointing to his friend George, 'Ven do you take his clothes off?' 'Why,' replied Mr. Pell, 'he stands third on the opposed list, and I should think it would be his turn in about half an hour. I told my clerk to come over and tell us when there was a chance.' Mr. Weller surveyed the attorney from head to foot with great admiration, and said emphatically, 'And what'll you take, sir?' 'Why really,' replied Mr. Pell, 'you're very upon my word and honour, I'm not in the habit of it's so very early in the morning that actually I am almost well, you may bring me threepenn'orth of rum, my dear.' The officiating damsel, who had anticipated the order before it was given, set the glass of spirits before Pell, and retired. 'Gentlemen,' said Mr. Pell, looking round upon the company, 'success to your friend. I don't like to boast, gentlemen, it's not my way, but I can't help saying that if your friend hadn't been fortunate enough to fall into hands that but I won't say what I was going to say. Gentlemen, my service to you.' Having emptied the glass in a twinkling, Mr. Pell smacked his lips and looked complacently round on the assembled coachmen, who evidently regarded him as a species of divinity. 'Let me see,' said the legal authority. 'What was I a saying, gentlemen?' 'I think you was remarking as you wouldn't have no objection to another of the same, sir,' said Mr. Weller with grave facetiousness. 'Aha!' laughed Mr. Pell. 'Not bad, not bad. A professional man too. At this time of the morning it would be rather too good a well, I don't know, my dear. You may do that again, if you please. Hem!' The last sound was a solemn and dignified cough, in which Mr. Pell, observing an indecent tendency to mirth in some of his auditors, considered it due to himself to indulge. 'The late Lord Chancellor, gentlemen, was very fond of me,' said Mr. Pell. 'And wery creditable in him too,' interposed Mr. Weller. 'Hear, hear,' assented Mr. Pell's client. 'Why shouldn't he be?' 'Ah! Why indeed?' said a very red faced man, who had said nothing yet, and who looked extremely unlikely to say anything more. 'Why shouldn't he?' A murmur of assent ran through the company. 'I remember, gentlemen,' said Mr. Pell, 'dining with him on one occasion. There was only us two, but everything as splendid as if 20 people had been expected. The Great Seal on a dumb waiter at his right hand, and a man in a bagwig and suit of armour guarding the mace with a drawn sword and silk stockings. Which is perpetually done, gentlemen, night and day. When he said, "Pell," he said, "no false delicacy, Pell. You're a man of talent. You can get anybody through the Insolvent Court, Pell, and your country should be proud of you." Those were his very words. "My lord," I said, "you flatter me." "Pell," he said, "if I do, I'm damned." "Did he say that?" inquired Mr. Weller. He did. "Vell then," said Mr. Weller, "I say Parliament ought to have took it up, and if he'd been a poor man they would have done it." "But, my dear friend," argued Mr. Pell, "it was in confidence." "In what?" said Mr. Weller. "In confidence." "Oh! wery good," replied Mr. Weller, after a little reflection. "If he damned hisself in confidence, o' course that was another thing." "Of course it was," said Mr. Pell. "The distinction's obvious, you will perceive." "Alters the case entirely," said Mr. Weller. "Go on, sir." "No, I will not go on, sir," said Mr. Pell, in a low and serious tone. "You have reminded, sir, that this conversation was private. Private and confidential, gentlemen. Gentlemen, I am a professional man. It may be that I am a good deal looked up to in my profession. It may be that I am not. Most people know. I say nothing. Observations have already been made in this room injurious to the reputation of my noble friend. You will excuse me, gentlemen. I was imprudent. I feel that I have no right to mention this matter without his concurrence. Thank you, sir, thank you." Thus delivering himself, Mr. Pell thrust his hands into his pockets, and frowning grimly around, rattled three halfpence with terrible determination. This virtuous resolution had scarcely been formed, when the boy and the blue bag, who were inseparable companions, rushed violently into the room, and said (at least the boy did, for the blue bag took no part in the announcement) that the case was coming on directly. The intelligence was no sooner received, than the whole party hurried across the street, and began to fight their way into court, a preparatory ceremony which has been calculated to occupy, in ordinary cases, from 25 minutes to 30. Mr. Weller, being stout, cast himself at once into the crowd, with the desperate hope of ultimately turning up in some place which would suit him. His success was not quite equal to his expectations, for having neglected to take his hat off, it was knocked over his eyes by some unseen person, upon whose toes he had alighted with considerable force. Apparently this individual regretted his impetuosity immediately afterwards, for muttering an indistinct exclamation of surprise, he dragged the old man out into the hall, and after a violent struggle, released his head and face. "Samivel!" exclaimed Mr. Weller, when he was thus enabled to behold his rescuer. Sam nodded. "You're a dutiful and affectionate little boy, you are, ain't you?" said Mr. Weller, "to come a bonneting your father in his old age." "How should I know who you was?" responded the son. "Do you s'pose I was to tell you by the weight of your foot?" "Vell, that's very true, Sammy," replied Mr. Weller, mollified at once. "But wot are you doing on here? Your governor can't do no good here, Sammy. They won't pass that werdict. They won't pass it, Sammy." And Mr. Weller shook his head with legal solemnity. "What a perwerse old file it is!" exclaimed Sam. "Always a goin' on about werdicts and alibis and that. Who said anything about the werdict?" Mr. Weller made no reply, but once more shook his head most learnedly. "Leave off rattlin' that 'ere nob o' yourn if you don't want it to come off the springs altogether," said Sam impatiently, "and behave reasonable. I vent all the vay down to the Markis o' Granby arter you last night." "Did you see the Marchioness o' Granby, Sammy?" inquired Mr. Weller, with a sigh. "Yes, I did," replied Sam. "How was the dear creetur a lookin'?" "Wery queer," said Sam. "I think she's a injurin' herself gradivally, vith too much o' that 'ere pine apple rum, and other strong medicines o' the same natur." "You don't mean that, Sammy?" said the senior earnestly. "I do indeed," replied the junior. Mr. Weller seized his son's hand, clasped it, and let it fall. There was an expression on his countenance in doing so, not of dismay or apprehension, but partaking more of the sweet and gentle character of hope. A gleam of resignation and even of cheerfulness passed over his face too, as he slowly said, "I ain't quite certain, Sammy. I wouldn't like to say I was altogether positive, in case of any subsequent disappointment. But I rather think, my boy, I rather think, that the shepherd's got the liver complaint.' 'Does he look bad?' inquired Sam. 'He's uncommon pale,' replied his father, ''cept about the nose, which is redder than ever. His appetite is wery so, but he imbibes wonderfully.' Some thoughts of the rum appeared to obtrude themselves on Mr. Weller's mind as he said this, for he looked gloomy and thoughtful; but he very shortly recovered, as was testified by a perfect alphabet of winks, in which he was only wont to indulge when particularly pleased. 'Vell now,' said Sam, 'about my affair. Just open them ears o' yourn, and don't say nothin' till I've done.' With this preface, Sam related, as succinctly as he could, the last memorable conversation he had had with Mr. Pickwick. 'Stop there by himself, poor creetur!' exclaimed the elder Mr. Weller, 'without nobody to take his part. It can't be done, Samivel, it can't be done.' 'O' course it can't,' asserted Sam. 'I know'd that afore I came.' 'Well, they'll eat him up alive, Sammy!' exclaimed Mr. Weller. Sam nodded his concurrence in the opinion. 'He goes in rather raw, Sammy,' said Mr. Weller metaphorically, 'and he'll come out, done so exceeding brown, that his most familiar friends won't know him. Roast pigeon's nothin' to it, Sammy.' Again Sam Weller nodded. 'It oughtn't to be, Samivel,' said Mr. Weller gravely. 'It mustn't,' said Sam. 'Certainly not,' said Mr. Weller. 'Vell now,' said Sam, 'you've been a prophesying away very fine, like a red faced Nixon as the sixpenny books give picters on.' 'Who was he, Sammy?' inquired Mr. Weller. 'Never mind who he was,' retorted Sam. 'He warn't a coachman, that's enough for you.' 'I know'd a ostler by that name,' said Mr. Weller, musing. 'It warn't him,' said Sam. 'This here gentleman was a prophet.' 'Wot's a prophet?' inquired Mr. Weller, looking sternly on his son. 'Why, a man as tells wot's a going to happen,' replied Sam. 'I wish I'd known him, Sammy,' said Mr. Weller. 'P'raps he might ha' throw'd a small light on that 'ere liver complaint as we was a speaking on just now. Hows'ever, if he's dead, and ain't left the business to nobody, there's an end on it. Go on, Sammy,' said Mr. Weller, with a sigh. 'Vell,' said Sam, 'you've been a prophesying away about wot'll happen to the governor if he's left alone. Don't you see any way o' taking care on him?' 'No, I don't, Sammy,' said Mr. Weller, with a reflective visage. 'No vay at all?' inquired Sam. 'No vay,' said Mr. Weller, 'unless,' and a gleam of intelligence lighted up his countenance as he sank his voice to a whisper, and applied his mouth to the ear of his offspring, 'unless it is getting him out in a turn up bedstead, unbeknown to the turnkey, Sammy, or dressing him up like an old woman with a green wail.' Sam Weller received both of these suggestions with unexpected contempt, and again propounded his question. 'No,' said the old gentleman. 'If he von't let you stop there, I see no vay at all. It's no thoroughfare, Sammy, no thoroughfare.' 'Well then, I'll tell you wot it is,' said Sam. 'I'll trouble you for the loan of £25. What good'll that do?' inquired Mr. Weller. 'Never mind,' said Sam. 'P'raps you may ask for it 5 minutes afterwards. P'raps I may say I von't pay, and cut up rough. You von't think of arresting your own son for the money, and sending him off to the Fleet, will you, you unnat'ral wagabone?' At this reply of Sam's, the father and son exchanged a complete code of telegraphed nods and gestures, after which the elder Mr. Weller sat himself down on a stone step, and laughed till he was purple. 'Wot a old image it is!' exclaimed Sam, indignant at this loss of time. 'Wot are you a sitting down there for, conwerting your face into a street door knocker, when there's so much to be done? Where's the money?' 'In the boot, Sammy, in the boot,' replied Mr. Weller, composing his features. 'Hold my hat, Sammy.' Having divested himself of this encumbrance, Mr. Weller gave his body a sudden wrench to one side, and by a dexterous twist contrived to get his right hand into a most capacious pocket, from whence, after a great deal of panting and exertion, he extricated a pocket book of the large octavo size, fastened by a huge leathern strap. From this ledger he drew forth a couple of whiplashes, 3 or 4 buckles, a little sample bag of corn, and finally a small roll of very dirty bank notes, from which he selected the required amount, which he handed over to Sam. 'And now, Sammy,' said the old gentleman, when the whiplashes and the buckles and the samples had been all put back, and the book once more deposited at the bottom of the same pocket, 'now, Sammy, I know a gentleman here as'll do the rest of the business for us in no time, a limb of the law, Sammy, as has got brains like the frogs, dispersed all over his body and reaching to the wery tips of his fingers; a friend of the Lord Chancellorship, Sammy, who'd only have to tell him what he wanted, and he'd lock you up for life, if that was all.' 'I say,' said Sam, 'none o' that.' 'None o' wot?' inquired Mr. Weller. 'Why, none o' them unconstitootional ways o' doing it,' retorted Sam. The Havis Caucus next to the Perpetual Motion is vun of the blessedest things as wos ever made. I read that 'ere in the newspapers wery often.' 'Well, wot's that got to do with it?' inquired Mr. Weller. 'Just this here,' said Sam, 'that I'll patronise the inwention, and go in that vay. No vysperin to the Chancellorships, I don't like the notion. It mayn't be altogether safe, with reference to gettin' out again.' Deferring to his son's feeling upon this point, Mr. Weller at once sought the erudite Solomon Pell, and acquainted him with his desire to issue a writ, instantly, for the sum of £25, and costs of process to be executed without delay upon the body of one Samuel Weller, the charges thereby incurred to be paid in advance to Solomon Pell. The attorney was in high glee, for the embarrassed coach horser was ordered to be discharged forthwith. He highly approved of Sam's attachment to his master, declared that it strongly reminded him of his own feelings of devotion to his friend the Chancellor, and at once led the elder Mr. Weller down to the Temple to swear an affidavit of debt, which the boy, with the assistance of the blue bag, had drawn up on the spot. Meanwhile, Sam, having been formally introduced to the whitewashed gentleman and his friends as the offspring of Mr. Weller of the Bell Savage, was treated with marked distinction, and invited to regale himself with them in honour of the occasion, an invitation which he was by no means backward in accepting. The mirth of gentlemen of this class is of a grave and quiet character usually, but the present instance was one of peculiar festivity, and they relaxed in proportion. After some rather tumultuous toasting of the Chief Commissioner and Mr. Solomon Pell, who had that day displayed such transcendent abilities, a mottled faced gentleman in a blue shawl proposed that somebody should sing a song. The obvious suggestion was that the mottled faced gentleman, being anxious for a song, should sing it himself; but this the mottled faced gentleman sturdily and somewhat offensively declined to do. Upon which, as is not unusual in such cases, a rather angry colloquy ensued. 'Gentlemen,' said the coach horser, 'rather than disturb the harmony of this delightful occasion, perhaps Mr. Samuel Weller will oblige the company.' 'Raly, gentlemen,' said Sam, 'I'm not wery much in the habit of singing without the instrument, but anything for a quiet life, as the man said ven he took the situation at the lighthouse.' With this prelude, Mr. Samuel Weller burst at once into the following wild and beautiful legend, which, under the impression that it is not generally known, we take the liberty of quoting. We would beg to call particular attention to the monosyllable at the end of the second and fourth lines, which not only enables the singer to take breath at those points, but greatly assists the metre. Romance. Bold Turpin vunce on Hounslow Heath his bold mare Bess bestrode her, ven there he seed the bishop's coach a comin' along the roader, so he gallops close to the horse's legs, and he claps his head vithin, and the bishop says, sure as eggs is eggs, this here's the bold Turpin. And the bishop says, sure as eggs is eggs, this here's the bold Turpin. Says Turpin, you shall eat your words with a sarse of leaden bullet. So he puts a pistol to his mouth, and he fires it down his gullet. The coachman, he not liking the job, set off at a full gallop, but Dick put a couple of balls in his nob, and prewailed on him to stop. But Dick put a couple of balls in his nob, and prewailed on him to stop. 'I maintain that that 'ere song's personal to the cloth,' said the mottled faced gentleman, interrupting it at this point. 'I demand the name of that coachman.' 'Nobody knowed,' replied Sam. 'He hadn't got his card in his pocket.' 'I object to the introduction o' politics,' said the mottled faced gentleman. 'I submit that in the present company that 'ere song's political, and wot's much the same, that it ain't true. I say that that coachman did not run away, but that he died game as pheasants, and I won't hear nothin' said to the contrairy.' As the mottled faced gentleman spoke with great energy and determination, and as the opinions of the company seemed divided on the subject, it threatened to give rise to fresh altercation, when Mr. Weller and Mr. Pell most opportunely arrived. 'All right, Sammy,' said Mr. Weller. 'The officer will be here at 4 o'clock,' said Mr. Pell. 'I suppose you won't run away meanwhile, eh? Ha ha!' 'P'raps my cruel pa'll relent afore then,' replied Sam, with a broad grin. 'Not I,' said the elder Mr. Weller. 'Do,' said Sam. 'Not on any account,' replied the inexorable creditor. 'I'll give bills for the amount at sixpence a month,' said Sam. 'I won't take 'em,' said Mr. Weller. 'Ha ha ha! Very good, very good,' said Mr. Solomon Pell, who was making out his little bill of costs. 'A very amusing incident indeed. Benjamin, copy that,' and Mr. Pell smiled again, as he called Mr. Weller's attention to the amount. thank you,' said the professional gentleman, taking up another of the greasy notes as Mr. Weller took it from his pocket book. 310 and 110 is 5. Much obliged to you, Mr. Weller. Your son is a most deserving young man, very much so indeed, sir. It's a very pleasant trait in a young man's character, very much so,' added Mr. Pell, smiling smoothly round as he buttoned up the money. 'What a game it is!' said the elder Mr. Weller with a chuckle. 'A regular prodigy son.' 'Prodigal son, sir,' suggested Mr. Pell mildly. 'Never mind, sir,' said Mr. Weller with dignity. 'I know what's o'clock, sir. When I don't, I'll ask you, sir.' By the time the officer arrived, Sam had made himself so extremely popular that the congregated gentlemen determined to see him to prison in a body. So off they set, the plaintiff and defendant walking arm in arm, the officer in front, and 8 stout coachmen bringing up the rear. At Serjeant's Inn Coffee House the whole party halted to refresh, and the legal arrangements being completed, the procession moved on again. Some little commotion was occasioned in Fleet Street by the pleasantry of the 8 gentlemen in the flank, who persevered in walking 4 abreast. It was also found necessary to leave the mottled faced gentleman behind, to fight a ticket porter, it being arranged that his friend should call for him as they came back. Nothing but these little incidents occurred on the way. When they reached the gate of the Fleet, the cavalcade, taking the time from the plaintiff, gave 3 tremendous cheers for the defendant, and after having shaken hands all round, left him. Sam, having been formally delivered into the warder's custody to the intense astonishment of Roker, and to the evident emotion of even the phlegmatic Neddy, passed at once into the prison, walked straight to his master's room, and knocked at the door. 'Come in,' said Mr. Pickwick. Sam appeared, pulled off his hat, and smiled. 'Ah, Sam, my good lad,' said Mr. Pickwick, evidently delighted to see his humble friend again. 'I had no intention of hurting your feelings yesterday, my faithful fellow, by what I said. Put down your hat, Sam, and let me explain my meaning a little more at length.' 'Won't presently do, sir?' inquired Sam. 'Certainly,' said Mr. Pickwick. 'But why not now?' 'I'd rather not now, sir,' rejoined Sam. 'Why?' inquired Mr. Pickwick. ''Cause,' said Sam, hesitating. 'Because of what?' inquired Mr. Pickwick, alarmed at his follower's manner. 'Speak out, Sam.' ''Cause,' rejoined Sam, ''cause I've got a little business as I want to do.' 'What business?' inquired Mr. Pickwick, surprised at Sam's confused manner. 'Nothin' particular, sir,' replied Sam. 'Oh, if it's nothing particular,' said Mr. Pickwick with a smile, 'you can speak with me first.' 'I think I'd better see arter it at once,' said Sam, still hesitating. Mr. Pickwick looked amazed, but said nothing. 'The fact is,' said Sam, stopping short. 'Well,' said Mr. Pickwick, 'speak out, Sam.' 'Why, the fact is,' said Sam, with a desperate effort, 'perhaps I'd better see arter my bed afore I do anything else.' 'Your bed!' exclaimed Mr. Pickwick in astonishment. 'Yes, my bed, sir,' replied Sam. 'I'm a prisoner. I was arrested this here wery arternoon for debt.' 'You arrested for debt!' exclaimed Mr. Pickwick, sinking into a chair. 'Yes, for debt, sir,' replied Sam, 'and as the man as puts me in 'ull never let me out till you go yourself.' 'Bless my heart and soul!' ejaculated Mr. Pickwick. 'What do you mean?' 'What I say, sir,' rejoined Sam. 'If it's 40 years to come, I shall be a prisoner, and I'm very glad of it, and if it had been Newgate, it would have been just the same. Now the murder's out, and damme, there's an end on it.' With these words, which he repeated with great emphasis and violence, Sam Weller dashed his hat upon the ground in a most unusual state of excitement, and then folding his arms, looked firmly and fixedly in his master's face. CHAPTER 44